Hello, this is Ina, and today I would like to share with you this small art book that I have created recently. I have called it Forget Me Not Moments, being inspired by the discreet beauty and symbolism of the Forget Me Not flower. I wanted this book to feel intimate and precious, like the kind of fleeting moments we try to hold on to before they disappear. The book is entirely created from very old and very special, often salvaged materials. Honestly, I have the feeling that I simply allowed those materials to tell their own story, and this time, the story became one of fragility, tenderness, and remembrance. For the cover, I used an authentic 19th century book cover, beautifully worn and shabby. I find that all these delicate colors and aged textures are simply gorgeous the way they are. For the binding, I used the slip knot binding method following an extremely well presented tutorial by Kelly from Book and Paper Arts, to which I will include the link below the video. I also used an authentic vintage bookbinding thread whose aged texture felt perfectly in harmony with the spirit of this little book. I truly love these visible knots and the hand-bound structure. Simple, humble, imperfect, and deeply tactile. Here you can see the marbled end paper that was originally there on the inside of the book cover with its gorgeous deep blue veining. And to the right, this is a postcard which was sent in 1951. It is hard to read the text, both because the card is folded and because of the handwriting, but let this be a part of the mystery. I have added a few stitches and knots with a blue thread. They are not meant to be decorative, to the contrary, they are almost disturbing. And that's the point. You know, sometimes people make knots not to forget something. And these knots are here just like functional reminders to oneself. Do not forget this. I have also added this discreet and fragile white on white embroidery as a touch of tactility and tenderness, and probably I was unconsciously seeking to soften the administrative feel of the postcard. Here I have glued on the other part of the 1951 postcard a poem, Le Myosotis, or Forget-Me-Not Flower. Part of the poem says, L'amitié semble sans parole nous dire, ne m'oubliez pas. Through the symbol, friendship seems, without words, to tell us, do not forget me. And later, tout me parle par cette fleur. Everything speaks to me through this flower. I thought those words connected very naturally with the atmosphere of my art book. Here I have attached a tiny fragment from an old apron, once worn by a French farmer or worker. In France, this type of clothing is called bleu de travail, which can be translated as worker's blue. You might find it interesting to know that the French bleu de travail first appeared in the 19th century as practical workwear worn by farmers, craftsmen, railway workers, and factory workers. The name simply comes from the deep blue color of the fabric, which was chosen probably because blue dyes were widely available at the time and because this color concealed stains, I can imagine. Over time, the bleu de travail became an important symbol of the French working world and is now appreciated for its beautiful patina, sometimes visible repairs, faded tones, and connection to ordinary human life and labor. Even on this tiny scrap, the patina is amazing, isn't it? I would also like to draw your attention to this antique, quite unusual decorative metal fastener in the form of a flower. It was probably intended for luxury stationery. I find the contrast and the harmony between this fabric scrap and the flower fastener almost emotional. you see the delicate blue color of a forget-me-not flower in a faded working clothing fragment, and you find the form of that same flower as a luxurious shining brass fastener meant to hold together papers and the memories they embody. On the right page, there is an antique lady's photograph taken from an old photo album. I did not alter it in any way. I even kept the uneven edges exactly as they were cut. The photograph is now extremely faded, as you can see, almost dissolving into the paper and barely present, just like a memory that is no longer fully accessible. To me, this spread feels very moving because each element seems to whisper, "Do not forget," in a different language, through words, fabric, metal, and image. Here on the left page, you can actually see the gray reverse side of the lady photograph, onto which I have attached a fragment from a vintage lady's stocking, which had been heavily mended many times. There is quite a touching story behind this. Some time ago, I bought a beautiful vintage lady's black velvet jacket with a floral lining at a flea market. As I was told, it dated back to 1940s. Inside, underneath the shoulders, I discovered small gray cushions. When I looked closer, I realized that they had been made from old mended stockings, carefully rolled and reused by the woman who once owned the jacket. I was deeply moved by the contrast between the elegant visible part of the garment and these very humble, fragile remnants hidden inside it. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for that woman to stay elegant during those hard times. And yet, she was still determined to be beautiful. I think this fragment carries that entire invisible story within it. To the right, I used a piece of old packaging paper covered with subtle grid-like marks. Over it, I stitched a very simple embroidery fragment carrying a small forget-me-not flower. On the left page, I used a fragment from a 19th century school notebook with traces of old handwriting, still visible beneath layers of blue and sepia ink stains that I have added. These soft stains almost resemble dancing lights drifting across the sky. On the right, there is a small antique embossed postcard adorned with swallows, roses, and delicate forget-me-not flowers, carrying the words "Souhait sincère," sincere wishes. I find this entire spread full of air, light, gentle movement, and dreaminess. Here on the left page, I created a collage from pieces of antique book bindings and covers. I love the worn surfaces, muted tones, and layered textures here. To the right, I used the reverse side of an antique postcard with its original handwriting and postmarks. Over it, I placed a fragment from a vintage magazine showing a lady reaching here towards a tiny millinery bouquet of forget-me-not flowers, which I have stitched directly onto the paper. This spread is built around very delicate details and quiet textures. On the left page, I used the front side of an antique postcard with two tiny forget-me-not flowers. The paper has subtle embossed relief on it, I kept the page quite minimal so that these small details could remain the focus. On the right page, there is a fragment from an antique lace catalog featuring a lace pattern of forget-me-not flowers, I guess. Here to the left, you can see a fragment from an antique ledger dating 1883. And to the right, a fragment from an embroidery pattern featuring forget-me-not flowers. And there is a small scrap of vintage linen that was used for fabrication of espadrilles, traditional French summer shoes. Here again, I like how the embroidery pattern carries the form of the forget-me-not flower and the textile carries its blue color. Here, against a softly distressed background, there is a fragment from an antique box, I believe once a children's shoe box, embellished with a small and discreet textile bow. On the right, there is a cabinet portrait of a little girl. Together, these elements evoke to me small traces of childhood and quiet memories linked to treasured objects and simple moments. Perhaps we all keep somewhere the memory of a very special doll, a beloved book, or a long-awaited gift. There is something touching in the girl's expression, I find, both joyful and slightly reserved, as if she had been briefly asked to pause and stand still before returning to the world of childhood. I particularly love these soft, faded blue-gray tones. There is something quiet and comforting about them, almost like colors gently softened by time. On the left, we see the reverse side of the little girl's cabinet portrait. We can see that it was taken in Alsace. I love discovering these forgotten details, even tiny floral motifs here. They remind me of little forget-me-not flowers. On the right, there is a collage of antique papers and textiles. It continues this muted palette, fragments of old cotton fabric, then a delicate strip of blue silk, and a background made from an antique lace sample card. Here on the left page, the reverse side of an antique lace sample card holds a fragment from a 1940s French songbook featuring a song Il y a de la joie, there is joy, layered with a piece of antique crochet lace. On the right, there is an antique card showing little ships framed in a delicate crown of forget-me-not flowers. There is something here that evokes the excitement of adventures. I find that these ships far away seem to hint at journeys still waiting ahead when you are young, while the forget-me-not flowers around feel like a gentle reminder that adventures with time becomes memories we carry with us. On this spread, you can see the lining from the vintage lady's jacket that I mentioned earlier, with its elegant floral pattern. And to the right, at the background, you can see a piece of an antique French envelope with its blue post stamp, a fragment from a cover of an antique schoolbook with the name Henri, and a vintage photo of a young man, and around its left bottom corner there is a fragment of antique or vintage bookbinding element. When I look at this spread, I think about the girl who was wearing her beautiful jacket in 1940s with this lining keeping the warmth of her body. And maybe somewhere in a small hidden pocket there was somebody's photo close to her heart, and the blue envelope behind gently evokes distance and remembrance. To the left at the background, this is a page from a vintage French passport with the word visas, and the image of the trees comes from a vintage French songbook from 1940s. And you can see the words from one of the songs here at the bottom. Jeunesse, jeunesse, printemps de beauté, marche, le temps presse vers la liberté, which I can translate as youth, youth, springtime of beauty, walk on, time is urging us onward towards freedom. Aren't these words beautiful? They make me feel nostalgic. And perhaps it is also this soft blue palette that gives this spread its particular feeling. The faded blue tones quietly echo the color of forget-me-not flowers, and to me, they feel like memories themselves, memories of journeys, of beginnings, of moments and places carried gently through time. Here on the left, this is the inside of an antique book cover. Its worn surface marked by age with area where the paper has partially disappeared, leaving behind beautiful traces of patina and wear. And across the page, I added authentic pressed forget-me-not flowers. And on the right, you can see a fragment from an antique school notebook that I distressed with some blue and sepia inks. There is something here that feels slightly distanced and distanced. There is something here that feels slightly distant and undefined, like memories that have faded, no longer entirely clear, yet still remaining warm and present. Not memories recalled in detail, but rather feelings, gentle impressions, fragments of something once precious, still lingering somewhere in the distance. Here on the left, you can see a partial image of a child's face collaged onto an old handwritten document, a piece of very fine antique lace. These flowers here resemble a lot forget-me-not flowers. This lace continues on the page to the right, which is distressed with sepia-toned ink. And there is also a scrap of a white on white embroidery of a forget-me-not flower on muslin here. To me, this spread is like a whisper of the inner child. Do not forget me. It's like a tender reminder not to leave behind that soft, curious, more fragile part of ourselves. And this spread is all about colors and textures. One of the most restrained and yet one of the richest, in my opinion. To the left, you can see several layers of background of some antique bookbinding. The vivid blue color to the right is actually a fragment of the same book cover as this one, but from its reverse side. Or to be more precise, this used to be the front side, and this used to be the reverse side of that book cover. And down here, there are two old textile scraps. This one from a 19th or even an 18th century quilt, and this one from a vintage bleu de travail apron that I mentioned earlier. And here is the final spread. To the left, you can see a fragment from an antique photo album page, and an antique embroidery of a forget-me-not flower on black silk. And to the right, there is the cover with an antique fabric scrap. So, that is it. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I would really like to know whether this art book spoke to you, which spreads or compositions touched you more than the others, what they evoked to you. It would be really awesome if you could take a few minutes to share your thoughts and feelings in comments. Thanks again, and wishing you to keep only beautiful and gentle memories. Take care. Bye bye.